Yet, when I say that America's first English language Bible was printed in 1782, that date confuses some. Many think that John Eliot, the famous apostle to the Indians, printed America's first Bible in 1661. Indeed, he did print a Bible in 1661, more than a century before this Bible. But his Bible was printed in the Massachusetts Indian language, not in English. Under the British policy, we could print Bibles in many languages, including not only the Massachusetts Indian language, but also Ojibwa, Cherokee, Shawnee, French, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Spanish, Russian, and most other languages, just not in English. So this Bible is America's first English language Bible. The records in Congress surrounding this Bible describe it as, quote, a neat edition of the Holy Scriptures for the use of our schools, end quote. On September the 12th, 1782, the full Congress approved this Bible, and it soon began rolling off the presses. In fact, printed in the front of this Bible is a congressional endorsement declaring, in part,
resolved that the United States in Congress assembled recommend this edition of the Bible to the inhabitants of the United States.
Of the events surrounding the printing of America's first English language Bible, one early historian observed,
who will call in question the assertion that America is a Bible nation? Who will charge the government with indifference to religion when the first Congress of the states assumed all the rights and performed all the duties of a Bible society long before such an institution had existence in the world?
Indeed, the American Congress first performed the action of a Bible society 27 years before any Bible society was formed in America. Most Americans today are shocked to learn that the Founding Fathers in Congress were responsible for America's first English language Bible. Within only a few months after that Bible was printed, it became obvious that Great Britain would sign a peace treaty, thus officially ending the American Revolution. Consequently, George Washington, Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, sent his letter of resignation to Congress. However, Washington also needed to notify the state governors of his resignation. Now, recall that America was not yet a full nation with her own independent government. Rather, she had been 13 separate and independent colonies, or states, agreeing to work together in the Continental Congress for their common good against the British. So on June the 8th, 1783, Washington issued a circular letter to the governors of all the states in which he told them of his resignation, and he then offered his prayer for each of them and for the country.
I now make it my earnest prayer that God would have you and the state over which you preside in His holy protection, that He would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, without an humble imitation of whose example in these things we can never hope to be a happy nation.
Washington reminded American leaders that without an imitation of Christ, whom he accurately described as, quote, the divine author of our blessed religion, that without an imitation of Christ, America could never hope to be a happy nation. 3 months later, on September the 8th, 1783, the formal peace treaty with Great Britain was signed by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay. Like so many of the other official records of the American Revolution, that document also openly acknowledged God. In fact, the opening line of the peace treaty began with the invocation,
in the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity.
This is yet another indication of the influence of the Bible and of its teachings on America. It is also a reminder of just how much so many in American media and government today have forgotten. And it also reminds us all just how far we've strayed from America's original biblical roots. Let's move ahead to the year 1787, the year of the Constitutional Convention. With national independence now a reality, America's legislators turned their full attention toward permanently securing their newly gained liberty. To this end, delegates from each state were sent to Philadelphia in May of 1787 to revise the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Articles of Confederation, that was the document under which the national government had functioned during the American Revolution. However, it soon became evident to all the delegates that revising the Articles was insufficient. A new government pact was needed. While the delegates had not originally convened for that purpose, their work ultimately produced an entirely new document, the U.S. Constitution. That Philadelphia gathering is now called the Constitutional Convention. One of the longest speeches in the convention was delivered by its elder statesman, Benjamin Franklin, on June the 28th, 1787. That speech came after weeks of debates when the delegates were having difficulty reaching a consensus on virtually any issue. Addressing George Washington, President of the Convention, Franklin declared,
"Mr. President, in this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth, and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of Lights to illuminate our understanding? In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of superintending providence in our favor. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business."
Significantly, this so-called least religious founding father invoked from memory several scriptural passages to make his point, including James 1 and Genesis 11 and Psalms 127 and Matthew 10. Today, over 2 centuries later, Congress still has daily prayer, and the precedent for that daily prayer has a scriptural basis. Another demonstration of the influence of the Bible on America. And despite the relentless efforts of special interest groups like the ACLU and Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, and the Freedom From Religion Foundation, and the Anti-Defamation League, People for the American Way, and the efforts of so many other similar groups to remove prayer from all public events and governmental institutions, such clearly was never the intent when this country's governing documents were instituted. As a result of the document produced at the Constitutional Convention, America now has become the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. Significantly, our Constitution was an original and uniquely American document. It was not a compilation of the best clauses of other constitutions from across the world. Our Constitution contained ideas that had never before been embodied in a written Constitution. Politically new and novel practices such as the separation of powers, checks and balances, and full republicanism. But where did the founders get their ideas for this most successful of all constitutions? In an attempt to answer this question, political scientists embarked on an ambitious project to analyze some 15,000 writings from the founding era. Those writings were examined with the goal of isolating and identifying the specific political sources quoted in the time period surrounding the establishment of American government. If the sources of those quotes from that period could be identified, then the origin of their ideas could be determined. So in the 15,000 writings selected, the researchers identified some 3,154 direct quotations, and over the next 10 years, they documented the original sources of those quotations. The research revealed that the single most cited authority in the writings of the founding era, are you ready, was the Bible. 34% of the documented quotes were taken from the Bible, a percentage almost 4 times higher than the second most quoted source. In fact, signers of the Constitution George Washington and Alexander Hamilton acknowledged that the principle undergirding the separation of powers was the same principle found in Jeremiah 17:9, a principle concerning the depravity of man that had been the subject of numerous sermons during the founding era.
The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond a cure. Who can understand it?
Because man was naturally depraved, they understood that care must be taken to safeguard his having absolute or unrestricted power. Thus, separation of powers and checks and balances were installed. Many other Bible verses and principles also found embodiment in the Constitution. For example, compare the Article 1, Section 8 constitutional provision on uniform immigration laws with Leviticus 19:34. Leviticus 19:34 states,
The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were aliens in Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
The verse says that aliens are to be treated uniformly. Significantly, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution reads,
The Congress shall have power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization,